well as community service groups. I know Ken Curry, we've been at several meetings together. I've presented at NPPV before. So let's just go ahead and get started for the sake of time. There's always plenty to cover, and I will only scratch the surface, you know, but hopefully hitting some of these highlights will kind of give you the perspective for where the Columbus area is at. I'll focus on Platte County specifically most of the time, but I will give you some comparisons, some maps. So if you're working more regionally, you'll be able to see some of the, you know, neighboring areas. I've heard Madison County and Norfolk mentioned a couple times. I'm sure the Chamber's working with Schuyler and Colfax County a lot as well. So we'll be able to see those kinds of things. So I'm going to share my screen, get going here, and minimize a couple of things. Okay, so just title slide, and we will share the slides out so you don't have to scramble and take notes. So we're always very willing to share everything. I'll probably put it into PDF for file size, but definitely you don't have to scribble tons of notes, so they'll come to you. My contact information is on there, and our office is a resource. So if there's anything you'd like to see replicated or adjusted, just send me an email, let me know, and we'll be very happy to help out and compile that data and information. So quickly about our office, there's our website, so you can check us out. One of our key roles is to house the Nebraska State Data Center, and every state has a data center liaison to the Census Bureau. Some are at state government, such as workforce development offices. Others are at state libraries, and the university system's kind of another common approach to that. So we're really the place where you can go to get demographic and socioeconomic information that's already compiled for you, or that we have the ability to compile as we partner with the Census Bureau on a variety of their data releases. Another thing that we do that might be interested to this group is that we do run a certificate and fundraising management program. Been doing that for a long period of time, just helping with all the aspects that might be related in a capital campaign. So we, like I said, been doing that for about 25 years. It's online right now rather than in person, but classes are still ongoing. If anybody's interested in that, you can check out the website. We're also very involved in a state transit initiative. And we, as you probably are aware, transportation is a key issue, and especially a lot of rural Nebraska as we go into older age groups specifically, as we might start to have some vision disabilities or other aspects where driving becomes difficult. So we're working on some rideshare programs with the state Department of Transportation on that. Finally, we are housing a relatively new platform called Associated with Governing Magazine, kind of taking over some of their data portals and interactives. So you can check that out off of our website as well. Just a little bit more national and like top 100 metro style analysis on those, but some neat interactives to see there. Otherwise, we do a variety of different things that can be customly applied to whatever situation that you're looking at. I specifically do a lot of presentations and population projections, things of that sort. So very, very applied research as well. Okay, going to talk a little bit about the data itself. So primarily when we're talking about census data, there's two main sources. Decennial census, you're probably familiar with that. It's been ongoing this spring. And then there's an annual American Community Survey, and that provides all our socioeconomic information, such as income and poverty, employment and unemployment, labor force status, educational attainment, and a variety of those other statistics that aren't on the decennial census. So as I mentioned, we are in the throes of the 2020 census. Hopefully you've received your form, filled it out, whether online or on paper. Been a unique census cycle for sure, given all the virus impacts, but things are continuing. You can check out our website for resources. I'll give you some numbers for Platte County and the area in a moment. But generally, Nebraska is doing very well, but we still have a ways to go. And at this point, with all of the census mailings having been completed, responses are basically only trickling in from those households that might have set it off to the side and are now going through their mail like, oh yeah, I should do this. So there, a few are coming in each and every day, but it's really slow now. So if there's a way that you can promote the census through a newsletter or on your website, those blurbs would definitely be appreciated, because that's kind of where the information battle is right now, to keep things top of mind, given all the virus news, presidential election coming up. There's just a lot of competition to stay on the news cycle. While the folks in this call, you might not be looking for a census job, if there are people that you know of who, again, perhaps maybe have some slack hours now at the virus, or some changes in their job situation, Census will be hiring those jobs here at the late part of June and early July for work in approximately August. So go to that 2020census.gov jobs site. People can apply to be on the portal, then they'll be contacted by the Bureau. Finally, again, we want to push for self-response through the middle of August. That's when the non-response follow-up, or census takers going door to door, will happen. So there's a variety of ways to, again, get those forms back in. 2020census.gov is the main one, through the internet site. So whatever you can do here would help, so that those responses continue. Here's a couple of things regarding Nebraska's response so far to the census. I thought you'd find this interesting. We are a top 5 state, and it's really those areas, kind of the upper Midwest, or kind of maybe the Big Ten West part of the conference, that's looking at that. So Minnesota leads, followed by Wisconsin, then our neighbor to the east in Iowa. Michigan is slightly ahead of us, and then Nebraska comes 5th. So all those states border each other, and are kind of known for being a little bit more, I don't know, patriotic or civic minded. So they're just doing the best right now. Lincoln itself, this is kind of an amazing statistic, is #1 among cities of its size, so 175,000 or more population. So to be #1 among 150 of the most populous cities, that's kind of a feather in their cap. And then generally in Nebraska, our eastern part of the state and our metro areas are doing a little bit better than our more rural territory and counties that are further out west. As I mentioned, Platte County is doing just fine, #5. Although Platte County did rank #1 overall back in 2010. So I'll just pull up this link here. This should load direct to the internet. And we'll just kind of give this map where you can see the feature of how they lay this out. So the darker blue is doing the best. So Sarpy County leads kind of the commuting outlying area into the Omaha metro, very suburban, has more than 75% response right now. 75.2 you can see there in the total, almost matching where it was 10 years ago at 75.4. Here's Platte County, again, would be ranking 5th, 72%, a little bit shy of where we were back in 2010, so still a ways to go. But then again, you can see as we shift further west, a lot of this orange and I guess it's gold shade, and those are all areas that are still less than 50% on their response rate. So you could pick any county here and it's going to be below 50%, and it just has a ways to go. Generally speaking, our more diverse communities, such as Colfax or Dakota County in the Northeast region, Madison would be ranking about top 10 for response rate. They've done quite well. So there's a lot of concern going in. We might have a lot of less participation among specifically our Hispanic Latino community, but so far responses are doing quite well. And you can see these counties again approaching where we ended back in 2010. So I'm going to go back into the PowerPoint. And again, the last of this slide was just a map in case it didn't load for me on the internet. There's again what the map looks like. Okay, so let's talk about Platte County population change. And I know we talked pre-call, if there are questions that come in, we can take them throughout. Otherwise, saving to the end is fine as well, but probably have to put those into the chat so we can see those, or have somebody let me know that there's a question that'd like to be asked. On all my slides, I tend to put a takeaway at the top line. So if you look at nothing else, look at that top sentence and you'll kind of see what the takeaway is, followed by the exact title of the graph or table that I'm showing. So this is births and deaths. Births shown in the black line. And you can see how steady births in Platte County have been since about the mid-1980s or so. This is our millennial births right about the year 1980. So children of the baby boomers having their own children at that, or I should say baby boomers having their own children at that time in about 1980. But then again, we came into the farm crisis. A lot of people left Nebraska, so those births occurred somewhere else. The red line are deaths, and you'll see that this is starting to trend upward. So that will continue as our population ages, and we're gonna that's just a fact of life. And from a housing perspective, that will open up some houses onto the market in all likelihood as we move forward here. So keep that in mind as we discuss this. But that's our natural component of population change. You can see it's always been positive for Platte County. But in this takeaway box, here again, we see that this is the lowest level of natural change. The gray bar showing the difference between births and deaths is the lowest since records began on this at the county level from 1946. So that is kind of a new thing, and seeing the level of natural change decline. And that's probably going to continue to be under pressure as those deaths rise in the years ahead. Okay, so this is a look at the components of change. So we just kind of looked at this natural change, which is in black. That's the births and the deaths. And then the red bars are migration. Okay, so if you're above the zero line, that's a net in-migration, like Platte County had during much of the 1970s. But then you can see how the red bars are below the zero line, meaning out-migration during most of the 1980s, kind of a rough decade with the farm crisis and early 80s recession as well. So you can see that in general, most bars have been below the zero line, meaning out-migration, and bars above have kind of been the exception to that rule. So that's been taking away from Platte County's population and putting pressure on growth. So we'll see where that goes in the years ahead. You can see that out-migration hasn't been too large this decade, but still a net outflow, more people leaving the area than moving in. Okay, so this slide breaks apart the migration, and it's taking a look at migration by age specifically for Platte County. So we have young ages on the left going up the age scale to older ages on the right. And what you'll notice probably is these two big red bars right here as people in their late teens and early 20s leave to go off to college or other work opportunities and things of that sort. So that's losing, you know, about 30% of the population as you flow from one 5-year age cohort to the next. So it's a pretty sizable outflow, although a lot of rural counties will see that around 50%. But again, that is a big negative. Then some people come back, or the area is attracting newcomers to the area, predominantly for work purposes. And of course, if you're in your early 30s and have young children, you're going to bring them along. Okay, you might like to leave them where you have moved from, but generally families move together. So you're going to see some of these positives for children as well. So overall, when we look at the migration rates, it is a negative about 2.5% over a 5-year period, or again, roughly 5% over 10 years. So that is a sizable draw, outflow that you can see from there. Again, Nebraska doesn't have the mountains or the oceans or generally that great of weather. So again, we see some retirees tend to move out of the area, but then they often come back so they can be close to their grandkids and for medical reasons and things like that. So that's the general pattern that we see. Just to give you some perspective, when we talk rather than rates, but raw numbers of people, we have about 2,000 in that college age range that are flowing out, as opposed to only about 450 that come back in this mid 20s and early 30s. So you can see that's a sizable net loss as we put the two side by side. Okay, briefly talking about college, since that's such a driver of what's occurring, I won't talk much about the specific places where people are going to, but rather how Platte County and the area fits in with this. So again, I'm just going to compare the college age range versus the high school age range to see the difference. So all of these counties here are having more college age students than high school age students, okay? Not surprisingly, Lancaster County with Lincoln and UNL and other locations, Southeast College, for example, pulling in the most, and then Kearney and Wayne and some of these others. We have folks might be interested in the Madison County information as well as a net importer of college students. But generally speaking, only a handful of our Nebraska counties have more people of college age than high school age, at least back in the 2010 census data. So that is something that definitely changes a lot of Nebraska's population. I'm an example of that. I didn't mention, I grew up in the Columbus area on the farm north of Genoa, and then my parents retired and I finished my high school career in Genoa and then left to go to Lincoln for college, and then met my spouse, started my job, and have stayed in the metro ever since. But that is a typical pattern that's repeated across the state. Here are like the exporters of these college students, and you'll notice as I bring this with the arrows here, that Platte County is one of the places that loses the most people from that college-related moving phenomenon. So even though Central Community College is located there and might keep a few students, on net, Platte is losing a large number of folks, fifth most among all counties. You'll see Hall County there with, again, some of the Central Community College system, and Gage County with Southeast Community College, again, all losing people of college age, even though they have a college in that location. So again, that does have a big impact on how that population is structured. Okay, moving on. When we talk about education, I like to use maps because, again, I can't talk about every particular location, but you can look at the area that you focus on and see which categories they fall under. So the light shade of gray, let's see if I can get my cursor back here, is having the 25-year-old population, less than 25% of that population would have a bachelor's degree or more education. So we can see that locally in some of the Platte County area, again, including in my home area around Genoa here. The darker gray is having at least 20% with a bachelor's degree, and you can see Platte and Madison and some of these other area counties in that range. And then what's kind of surprising is we only have so very few counties that are above the state average of a little over 30% with a bachelor's degree. And if you look at those counties, they're kind of in the metro areas as well as where the actual large colleges are located, with Wayne State, UNK, and out Chadron State College in Dawes County. So those are the only areas that have more than 30% of their adult population with bachelor's degrees or more. And to give you the specific Platte County information, it's just over 20%, ranking, about middle of the pack, 37th best, so about a third or towards 50%, 50th percentile for our 93 counties. So that's just the way it's structured. So that does have an impact on income and other aspects that you guys are all dealing with. So let's talk about diversity a little bit. You can't talk about demographics without diversity. So I'm going to show you here our population for specific age groups of Platte County back in 2000 for those who were either non-white or Hispanic Latino. So here's the data, starting with young ages at the bottom of the screen and going upward towards older ages. And you can see that in the 2000 timeframe, we had a lot of diversity among this younger working group. And that's the population that's going to be in their key reproductive years having kids. So we see that the child numbers are also well above the countywide average of 8% being a person of color. And then it scales back as you go to older age groups, much less diversity there. So I'm going to show you the same graph, but forwarding it in time to both 2010 and the most current data for 2018 on this next slide. So I'm just going to advance this forward. And again, the same gray bars back from 2000 we just looked at. And then you'll notice by 2010, the darker gray, all of these age groups have diversified more. So we approximately doubled overall from 8 to about 16% diversity by 2010. And then the red bars are the most current estimates for 2018, and we can see continued growth to where now we're well above 30% of young children are a person of color, and then approximately 30% for all of these teen and young working ages as well. So again, you'll notice how there used to be lower levels here, but this is all filled in now as time has moved forward, and we're roughly at 30% diversity among our younger population. And again, that scales back, but all ages have become at least slightly more diverse over time in the local area. Okay. This will continue to increase. Whenever I take a look at a county's numbers, each and every year, these bars go incrementally further to the right, meaning that the diversity percentages are growing, and that presents opportunities and challenges for the local area. So just be aware of how big of a factor that this is, that is going to continue as we go forward in time, as our young children today age and eventually have their own children. Okay. This is a map of diversity, looking again county level, and walk you through the color codes. You'll notice that Platte County and all of the northeastern Nebraska area are in this gray shade, which means that simultaneously we had a population decline among whites during the 2000s, and our non-white population increased during that same time frame. So diversity is occurring not only because we're seeing new population groups, births exceeding deaths among our non-white population, for example, but also at the same time, we're seeing a population loss of whites. And that's stemming from the outmigration, particularly for college that I mentioned earlier. But you can see how consistent that gray shade is throughout all of Northeast Nebraska, all of the southern tier with Kansas, most of the panhandle. So this is about something very common throughout Nebraska. The exception would be the red, where we're seeing both white and non-white population growth. That's generally in the metro areas and along the interstate to our larger communities like Kearney and North Platte. Johnson County, a bit of an outlier because they constructed a prison during this time frame. So without that, I believe they would have been in the gray as well. But again, you can see how few counties are having both population groups increase over time. Okay, so that leads us to some differences that I wanted to highlight, again, as they might relate towards housing. Here, we'll start talking about a few more housing specific items over the next slide or two. So again, looking for bachelor's degrees, we've talked about that degree is about 21% for Platte County overall, a little bit higher among our white population, and then it's about double the rate of higher education for non-Hispanic whites versus Hispanic Latino population. So some gaps and differences there. When we look at poverty, education influences employment and earnings potential. So with the higher level of education, we see a very low poverty rate among our non-Hispanic white population in Platte County versus an elevated rate of poverty among Platte County's Hispanic or Latino population. So you can see there's about 3 times higher than among the white population locally. So that, again, is a gap that I know that you guys are working on and trying to address, but it is a systematic one that is happening in the local area. Something that drives poverty is family status and whether or not there's 2 income earners in a household. So if we take a look at a situation where there's a mom but no male present in the household and that family has children, which might be called a single mom situation. Again, a little bit lower among our non-Hispanic white population than our Hispanic or Latino population. So you can see, again, 1 out of 5 families in Platte County who are Hispanic or Latino are in that situation where they're a single mom. So that poverty rates are elevated for single parents. So that's why that ties in here. And then finally, looking at home ownership, you can imagine if you have relatively higher poverty, you're going to have relatively lower home ownership. So quite high among our non-Hispanic white population, 3 in 4 households who are white owning their own home versus a little over half of our Hispanic Latino community being a homeowner. These are the most current data centered around 2016 timeframe for Platte County. So that's as current as we have. Okay, talking about poverty itself, Platte County does do pretty well. This is a county ranking I'm going to show here. So these counties highlighted in gold are neighbors to Platte County, and then you'll see Platte County listed here ranking 18th among Nebraska's 93 counties. So again, pretty well. And as I compare this a little bit more, you'll see again how that relates to some of the neighbors. So here are the other border counties. And again, you'll see an area like Colfax County, rather being in the top 20 like Platte, they're about in the bottom 30 counties. Similar county, Dodge with Fremont, again, ranking toward the bottom. That'd be about 14th worst for poverty rate there. And then Madison County, for whatever reason, has been elevated in their poverty rates the last several years. So you can see over a 15% poverty rate in Madison County, as opposed to an 8% rate in Platte County. So even though the two counties are quite similar in a lot of their characteristics, poverty is something that definitely differs between those two neighbors that might take specific policies or programs to address each of the local challenges in each area. Okay. Moving forward, I'm going to end up here on these housing items related to consumer life cycle. So this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. It'll make sense to you as I lay it out. So what's being graphed here, this is from a book. It's just spending by age and where you might spend your most amount of money. So when you're older, that's when you're going to be spending the most money out of any point in your life on prescription drugs or the need for nursing homes. Again, most people take their cruises once they're first retired, right around their late 60s or 70 or so. So again, what's this showing is peak spending on specific items. So here's how this works. People are getting married, first marriage, average age roughly 26, 27 years old. And that's the point in time in your life where you're spending the most money on apartments. As you become married, typically that first child is coming along a couple years later, age of first birth, roughly 28, 29 years old now. And as that happens, especially if a second child comes along a couple years later, you need more space than what the apartment has to offer. So you make that switch from apartment living to your first time house, roughly in that age 30 timeframe part of your life, give or take a couple of years. So you'll see that. Then 10 years later, those children that were born when mom was 28, now they're turning 13 when mom's 41. And again, you might need more space. So it's the kind of thing where you're having people over and you want to send the kids down into the basement and the adults can stay upstairs and do what they're going to do, talk and watch the football game or whatever. So people typically trade up, buy that larger home roughly when they're in their early 40s. Then 10 years later, the kids are in college, so you'll see that one. And I don't have it on this particular graph, but again, with the kids in college and not having to tote them around in the minivan anymore, you'll also tend to trade up and buy that pickup truck or the sports car that you always wanted in your early 50s right there. So what happens in the life cycle dictates a lot of different behaviors that people have. So we can look at these patterns, and the book would mention that people tend to borrow the most for that step-up home purchase when people are in their early 40s. So I know that we had one credit union person on the call. So if you're looking at loaning and making those mortgages, that's definitely something that will have an impact on your business model. Again, one that I always find kind of interesting that people find funny is that when most spending on potato chips, they can get this detailed with this data, is when you're have the household age 42. So again, that's those teenagers crunching on all the potato chips, kind of the bottomless pit, so to speak, for trying to keep them happy and satisfied while they're doing their activities down in the basement. So this is a useful model for us. I'm going to show where Platte County fits into this. So here's the home ownership data back from 2010. So I have a couple of slides to go here. So we can see the age groups ascending in this column, and then here's all the actual data, but focus on the ownership rates here by age. So again, you can see that when people are just starting out, very low home ownership rates. And then you get into middle age, and this really accelerates quickly as people move in, especially their late 30s. You can see it's over 70% for those who are in their late 30s and early 40s. And then it kind of, continues to rise, but starts to slow and peaks out here as people approach retirement. And then home ownership does drop as people age and they want to downsize, not have to mow the yard or scoop the snow. So then they might be more in an apartment living at that point, or some kind of condo where things are taken care of for them. So those aspects of the housing life cycle will have an impact in the years ahead. So here's Platte County's population structure back in 2010, just to give you some perspective on this. So again, we have this large baby boomer population. At that time, they were roughly 45 to 63 years old. Okay. Then your Gen X is a smaller population group that followed the boomers. And then our millennials are here. So what you'll notice from this graph off the detailed 2010 census data is that big drop that we see after age 18 as people head off to college, and then they slowly kind of either start to return, or the area is retracting, those new workers coming in their late 20s thereafter. Okay, so as I page this forward to the next slide, which will be the same exact thing, but for the 2020 current time frame, you'll see how these bars just move forward and impact where we're at. So this is the new graph, just aging 10 years forward from our population projections. And what you'll notice, or the point I want to bring in here, is again, we still have this structure, and that age 26 for peak renting, all of our millennial population has pretty much moved through that. So if you look at the takeaway from the slide again, our millennials are now past their peak renting age and have or are looking to buy their homes. And that's why you're starting to see more demand, more pressure on price given limited supply. We see it here in Omaha. There's way too few homes at the lower price point of the market where people who are first-time buyers would be looking, especially. I imagine that's true in your local area as well, but you know that market much better than I do. So this is just something that's impacting the numbers, that this larger millennial population group has pushed through their peak renting years and are now either bought or looking to buy that first-time home, especially as they're starting to have their kids now. Again, you can see that these are in the 30s, and that's, again, average age first birth about 28, 29, and all these grandchildren of the baby boomers are being born now, to see this slightly accelerating line here on our projection. We'll see what the 2020 census actually shows, but that's the pattern. Okay, I'm going to finish up just with one thing that I think might be useful for you guys, no matter where you're working, to think about workforce, because this is the one that gets a lot of the chamber's attention. So I just wanted to throw it in here. The first graph is Nebraska wide. So this is looking at prime age workforce, so 25 to 64-year-olds. So you should be done with college, but not yet quite ready to retire. And you'll see that this peaked out in about 2018. There's the number. And then over the next 10 years, it falls. So prior to the COVID-related changes, workforce availability was the #1 issue that we heard from chambers and organizations, companies trying to find skilled workers. So this pool of folks who might be available to work is going to be downtrending, and that just going to make it much more difficult to find those workers. So the final slide is taking a look specifically by county type, the same exact comparison. So what I just graphed for the state was about a 2% loss over the 10 years in that prime age workforce. Not a problem for Lincoln or Omaha, because they, again, pull in a lot of young people just out of college. But here you can see even places that would have a lot of births, or places that are very, well, just family oriented with our Hispanic Latino community, still going to lose population of prime age workforce. And then you can see Platte, Madison, Adams, Buffalo, it's not Buffalo, but Lincoln County, all as a group looking to lose about 10% of their prime age workforce over the next 10 years. So that's a pretty easy statistic to remember, kind of a dramatic one. Because if you're having trouble finding workers before, it's just going to get more difficult over the next 10 years as people age out of the workforce with that baby boomer population. So that's what I had prepared. Definitely happy to take any and all questions. But again, you can check out more at our website, or we'll definitely work with you to get anything that you're interested in. We do have our annual data conference coming up that a lot of people have attended in the past. So watch your email for that information, or check out our website in the days ahead. So I'm going to stop the screen share and just open it up for questions.
This is John. I have a question for David.
Go ahead.
It seems to me as though the factories here and the large companies have done a pretty good job of tweaking their salaries, their benefits, their hours to attract labor. And I also think that the city of Columbus, with lots of partners, is beginning to address the housing issue. If you have somebody coming here looking at a job and we don't have an adequate number of housing, regardless of the price point, they're probably not going to stay here. So I think both of those aspects are being addressed, and we will continue to address those. But it doesn't seem to be, I don't know how you attract the higher end worker, that is to say the executive suite worker. Keep in mind, our largest employers are out of state. Becton Dickinson out of New Jersey. Balin is local, and that's good. But Vichy, I'm not sure where their headquarters are, but a lot of times they will bring people to the executive state through their system, and the locals really don't get much of a shot at it. What would you suggest we do to attract educationally or quality of life wise higher end earners?
Yeah, it's a good question, a tough one, obviously, because again, that might be some things that are out of your control, like you mentioned. If they're looking to bring in or transfer that senior management, it just might not, or those jobs specifically are going to be located in other locations. It's kind of hard, you can't really force the company to put in those high wage jobs there necessarily. But I think as far as attractiveness goes, just trying to understand and then cater to, especially that younger demographic, those 25-year-olds roughly to 35-year-olds who especially might have grown up in the area, might be willing to come back to the area if they went to college elsewhere, to what really is important to them for amenities and things to do, shopping. It all ties in, and maybe, with the rise of Amazon and a lot of our online things, that's a little bit less than in past years. But people are looking for things to do and friendly communities, walkable, recreation. I'm sure you guys have had a lot of opportunities there, but just to keep those in the back of your mind for what makes the area attractive. What are your strengths? Cost of living is one that sometimes gets overlooked, or that people don't factor in as they make their wage comparison, that, yeah, you might get $10,000 more to work in Chicago, but your costs of living in Chicago are a lot higher than here in Nebraska as well. So to keep that top of mind. Then the other thing I'd mention, a little bit different, but I think a lot of organizations are starting to recognize that they need to target junior high and high school age students as being part of the pipeline, so that they don't necessarily leave the area, or they know that there's a job available for them if they want to come back after going off to college. So starting internships, job programs that let people know about that employer, and that, oh, I could work here, I could do this. That might help on some of those retention or attraction aspects across the board in jobs, but hopefully in those that they're aware that there are some higher wage positions there as well.
Thank you.
What else do we have?
Hi, this is Kelvin with NeighborWorks. I just wanted to know if you have anywhere in your data any correlation between housing and migration, how home ownership and migration?
Well, we know that as people first come to the area, whether they're coming back or they're a new person associated with the area, that usually going to take a little bit of time, that they want to feel out. Typically, they'll rent first, just because rental properties are easier to find and locate and get a sense for where they might want to have that more permanent housing or move to their single family house down the road. So initially, those homeownership rates will be lower. And then over time, people will make that switch from renting to owning. And again, we talked about some of the age aspects of that, but it will happen among our either immigrant or diverse communities as well over time. Again, it just might take a little bit of time or special programs for financing, as well as being able to save for a down payment and things of that sort. So it just might be a little more delayed, but I think that desire is there among the broader community across the board.
Thank you.
Okay.
David, this is Jean. One of the things that we've talked about is in the light of COVID and kind of the congestion and the health risks that can come with a disease like that, where we saw, higher death rates in more populated areas. Is there any research that shows after something like this that people would maybe want to move to a more open, freer, more safe environment that we could tap into? And
right, and you're starting to see some of that come out as people especially talk about New York residents and how it was so prevalent there, and just they couldn't escape it, so to speak. They were constantly exposed just to the high levels of population, commute patterns that included the subway, and just very, very congested. So I think that there will be more of a look to less dense areas that people, maybe even retirees, want to go to as they're maybe more concerned about their health, being a little bit older. So Nebraska, I think, can tap into that with the small town aspects that we have. And I've always said that there might need to be some game changer that would change these migration factors. Because if we look statewide, Nebraska's had out-migration every decade since the 1920s. Obviously, we know the Depression was a out-migration decade with the Dust Bowl and all that, but throughout time, Nebraska has lost pretty much each and every decade. And it wasn't only until the 90s and 2000s where we started to have an international in-migration that exceeded our domestic out-migration, that we've been able to become net positive overall as a state. So without that rising level of diversity, we'd still be seeing the net losses to migration. And again, the slides show that still kind of have some of that locally. So this new environment that we're in, especially related to telecommuting and being able to work from home, that could be the game changer dynamic that especially rural Nebraska, but a lot of the state overall, could take advantage of to stress our positives and move that needle in a direction that we want it to go.
This is Kimberly with Century 21. We got a notification last week, and I believe it came from the National Association of Realtors, that they're already seeing migration out. A lot of it has to do with the fact that people are finding out that they can successfully work remotely, and all of the things, the challenges that they saw with the exposure to this disease that hit everybody, especially in the populated areas. They're already seeing that migration back into the rural areas. And one of the comments that was made in that article was that they were very surprised that that happened that quickly, is that they thought that that might happen maybe later on, but it's already taking place. People are leaving the populated areas, and basically the other thing that they're doing is that they're moving home to where they originally came from so that they could be by relatives, so that they can help in case they needed it during a sickness.
Yeah,
So it's an
I would,
opportunity that we could possibly tap into. So
exactly. And I think it's probably going to be an easier sell or pull to get at those folks who grew up in the Columbus, Norfolk area that have then left, gone off to Lincoln and Omaha for college and stayed there, as opposed to trying to target those folks from maybe Chicago or New York or another large area that you're going to have some cultural differences. There's still this perception that Nebraska is out in the sticks. We have nothing, even though we have all these great things, whether it's, you know, through the arts or all sorts of programs and great amenities. So that cultural perception could be a hard sell. But I think for those folks who know the area, again, my parents are still in the Genoa area. They're up in their upper 80s now. I have a sister and a brother who are local that can help with their care and getting them supplies and things like that. So they're definitely not venturing out much right now. That could be a draw, and that those family related aspects, again, maybe you can bring the grandchildren so that they're closer to grandma and grandpa. And it's been proven now that you might be able to work remotely. You don't have to be in the larger city to perform your job. So that might help Nebraska locations across the board. You know, because I think in the early 2000s, when telecommuting really started to come in, people thought that might be the savior for a lot of rural territory. And that has not necessarily come to pass. It's helped. And there are some people that have been able to run small businesses through the internet and things like that. But the general dynamic of life happening, and what I mean by that is you leave the area to go to college, you start that internship in your larger city, or meet your spouse. Don't underestimate how important that meeting of your significant other is. And if they grew up in Lincoln or Omaha, it's a good possibility that you're going to stay there as well. So anyway, that's just not maybe going to be quite as much of a factor as we go forward in this COVID-related environment.
That's a strong premise of the Growing Together initiative up in Norfolk, if I'm understanding correctly. It's partly to create that downtown community where you do have young people that want to do internships, work for various companies, and then they have that immediate connection to maybe meet somebody, and then from there they experience a good place to live, and they'll move out of the renting population and into more suburban areas of Norfolk, right?
Yeah, I can't tell you how many of those migration by age graphs I've ran specifically for Mike Flood, because he is so interested in trying to keep and retain and attract that younger, because again, there's the multiplier effect. It's not just bringing in that one person, but then maybe they're, again, significant, maybe they're engaged. So, you know, the couple moves together to the area, and then they're either current or potential future children, you know. So when we lose those 25-year-olds, I'll just call them, that's a potential triple whammy, not just a double whammy, a triple whammy. So likewise, when you can bring them back, it's a triple positive, you know, for the local area, and it impacts schools and your demand for healthcare, and just makes all the businesses that much stronger as their demand for goods and services grows.
So you hear that, Haley? You got to come back and stay here.
It sounds like you're on the right path with the internship, so I'm glad to hear that.
This is John, and I want to corroborate what Kim said. A little bit different. Our son has lived in Delhi, India, and Barcelona for the last 3 or 4 years, and now he's looking at moving back to Poland. His wife is Polish. They met in Berlin. There seems to be a big draw from Poland, and they're not there yet, but they're moving in that direction. And he can do exactly what you said. He can work from anywhere. And you may have to go a ways to get to an international airport, but the actual work can be done anywhere. So it's kind of the same thing. It really is.
Yeah, I can just speak personally. Also, you know, that my wife, she works for a company headquartered in California. but she can do everything she needs right here in our basement. You know, a lot of phone calls and Zooms and things like that, and occasional travel, which has obviously been suspended here over the last couple months and probably for the next several months. But they might be getting together once or twice a year. You know, so it's really reasonable, you know, to be able to handle that. And that, again, maybe to your earlier question, John, maybe we don't have to bring as many high wage jobs here. Potentially, they could just work here locally for that company that already exists in some other larger location. You know, Twitter's already announced, for example, that people can work from home forever if they want to, you know, and things like other companies, I think Google and Facebook have also said that. So those possibilities are out there, and then it becomes a matter of stressing the positives of living locally, those quality of life aspects of which Columbus, Norfolk, and the entire area have a lot to offer.
They do. And I'm going to ask a question of you that actually is aimed at Jean. For a long time, the Chamber always had a number available of unfilled jobs in the community. I'm not sure if that number is still available or not, but the caveat to that is, I think that if we don't, we should have an educational path to those jobs that are available through the college, through whatever, the high school, whatever the case might be. So people who aren't trained to fill those unfilled jobs have a way to get there. And I don't know whether we have that or not, but Jean, you could answer the question for David, hopefully.
Yeah, we do have several programs, and I would say an outreach of that is even what Haley's doing as an intern. She's doing some research for United Way, which connects back to the workforce development initiatives that Kara runs. But we also, in the school systems, you know, you think of what the programs the Chamber does have, whether it's starting as early as Vehicle Day, introducing them to vehicles that are used here locally of different careers. And then in the junior high and middle school, we do interview skills, trying to start talking to them about different careers and bringing careers into the workplace. And those teachers do a lot of that themselves. Get into high school, we have the PATH program. That was a pilot 2 years ago, and it's actually a program this last year. And that's more of a job shadowing experience where they spend X amount of hours, not just looking at an accountant, but looking at a financial career. So they get to spend time with an accountant, then maybe it's the CFO, then they may go into purchasing, and you know, they see different facets of that mathematical career choice. Then as there's also in the junior high level or junior level, there's the Youth Leadership Columbus program. And then as seniors, there's a lot of interviewing that we do. There's Reality 101 mixed in with that. So we are trying to tap into that elementary age, introducing them to careers. There's, you know, always more ideas brought to the table. And I think some of the research that we identify that Haley will help with too is that gap. I was just telling Jake that the college is going to take advantage of some money that the governor has received from some of the CARES Act that can be used for training programs. So the Chamber's reaching out to some businesses to say, how can we get some of these high demand, high skill individuals that have that potential, give them the training, whether it's through an apprenticeship or through an on-the-job training opportunity paid for through these funds, and elevate them to give them more choices and more promotions, more advancement than what they might have based on the skill sets they hold currently. So I think there's a lot of good going on. Hopefully it'll be married with more of this attraction back to our community. We need to do a lot of promoting about what is good about Columbus and why you want to live here.
Did I do a good job of cueing you on that, Jean?
Say that again, John.
Did I do a good job of cueing you on that?
You did. I'll send you a quarter in the mail. Maybe it's up to $1 now.
I would just add on to that, that there are a lot of employers that are having like college curriculum or certificate programs as part of their training for their employees. And one thing we know about Nebraska, we talked about 30% have bachelor's degrees, but statewide we have about 25% of our 25 and older population that has completed some college, but not a full degree. So again, by the time you're 25, you know, if things were going on pace, you would have completed that degree, but for one reason or another, something had to stop or they couldn't bring that to fruition. So company programs aimed at helping people not only just complete their degree as far as having a certificate or a piece of paper, but hopefully also the skills that come associated with that, so they can show both, okay, yes, I have this degree, but I also have what an employer wants as far as the skill set.
And I would add one more thing. He asked me if it was okay if he said it, but I'll say it because I'm very proud of the man that gave this presentation today. I taught him years ago in Genoa in the high school. And so it's neat to see him be such a contributor to our economic development, all the data that we use for various reasons, whether we're a service organization or whether we're a chamber of commerce. I would add one more thing, a question maybe, is if there is going to be more of home workers, remote workers, it would have an effect on buildings then. You know, I think of my former employer of NPPD. Usually there are about 400 people that work in that building. They were able to have many of their employees work from home. So you decrease that, you may have 100 in that building. Do you need that big building in order to do the job? Or will we start to see some vacant buildings because people don't necessarily need that brick and mortar in order to have their businesses?
Yeah, it suggests that, you know, perhaps the more commercial real estate market for office space and again, the rise of online shopping for putting pressure on the retail space, and things are changing. They've always changed and evolved to either new technology or new preferences that American consumers and workers have. But I think you're on the right track that there are going to be big adjustments. You know, I can see it at the university, for example. You know, do we need more classroom space? Probably not right now, because they're going to be shifting to more online classes where they can, but still providing that student experience where they can as well. But again, on these large dollar programs and aspects of brick and mortar, that might be thought through much more critically and get more backburnered and more of the programmatic items brought to the front instead.
I think
And I'm selfish. It's 10 o'clock. I didn't mean to take all the time. Roger or Bonnie or anybody else have any other questions? Or?
Oh, yeah, I have a quick one. Do you see any issues with rural internet connectivity, especially if we're all moving to online? I know I serve on a couple of national things for NeighborWorks America, and usually rural areas are the last to get any type of update like 5G or anything like that.
Yeah, so that will be a constraint and a challenge. And I think there's a lot of folks who are aware of that, especially as more and more people are going on. Just the bandwidth of the system has that kind of trouble. I have seen research that suggests that the more limited the internet connectivity, the worse the overall migration is, even among rural areas. So they kind of basically put it into 5 categories from worst to best, and then looked at the migration of those same counties. And again, the better the internet was, the better their migration tended to be. So there is a correlation there from some research, and definitely an important issue. You know, I don't know how you handle that, but I have been at some like rural electric meetings, and they talked about as a way to diversify to providing broadband the same way that they brought electricity to rural areas, you know, back in the 50s and such. So that's being looked at. How it moves from point A to point B, I'm not exactly sure.
I just have a comment, maybe more than a question. You know, we always measure bachelor degree levels, but a lot of the job opportunities in our community are very good jobs that do not require a bachelor's degree. Many of our industry are looking for that associate, you know, technical program. Many of our trade areas, you know, do not require that. Is there some data that would show what do we have as far as educational levels in those technical areas? Because when I look at a lot of the jobs, again, a lot of them require that versus a bachelor's degree.
I don't know if there'd be as much as far as what is required. We do, however, have data that can look at that composition or distribution of the educational attainment levels by like particular occupations or industry sectors. And I know a colleague at UNO is delving into that to see, you know, do we have among those who are in tech, for example, do we have a gap between our level of education here in Nebraska versus nationally or compared to another specific state? So again, while it may or may not be needed, there are associated advantages, again, that people can show that they have that degree, that certificate or skill set, that then perhaps can demand the higher level of wages as well as they negotiate with their employer, for example. Yeah, I know the same graph or map that I had for bachelor's degrees, we have it for associate's degrees as well. And I know that Madison County in particular is especially high in their portion of the population that has an associate's degree. And that should by no means be overlooked. That is a positive, and just as you can move further up the scale, the better and better outcomes tend to be.
Thank you. I also thought I read under the CARES Act that there was some resources available for rural areas to get the internet connectivity that they need. Has anybody else read that? Or so hopefully addressing, Calvin, what you're talking about, that some of these rural areas, because schools struggled with that in doing their education to their students, but I thought there were some dollars available to help rural America get connected.
Yeah, there is a reversed auction. There's a rural development, they call it RDOF, Rural Development Opportunity Fund. And some of the dollars are going to be expended through a reverse auction where bidders that like Great Plains and Allo and internet providers can bid on building some infrastructure to connect communities. I've sat in on a few of those calls. It's driven in part by the state, and the state has had some success in putting dollars toward Northeast Nebraska, Columbus, mostly in Wayne, in that area. But there is, you're right, a movement to invest more dollars. They're doing it through this auction, and people can bid on those jobs to build infrastructure, especially around the north. The map I saw was really around the Northeast, Albion, Pierce, or here in Platte Center, and over there by Genoa and Fullerton, kind of in that area, and a little bit down in Butler, by David City in that area.
And Bonnie, just to answer that question, most of that money is being used to expand it, not necessarily to make it better. Basically, the biggest problem we have right now is that all of our service providers are 3 times out. So like Time Warner is the primary, and they're even the second. So Spectrum and like Cable One, I think it's Sparklight here in Norfolk. These guys are renting from a guy who's renting from a guy, essentially, to be able to provide the bandwidth that we have now. So that's why it's quite hard for us to be able to advance in it. And I think they're looking into ways to make these companies like Spectrum and Sparklight bigger, but it's going to take a little bit. 5G is supposed to change everything. We'll see how that goes.
Well, David, this is great information. I think a few of us probably reaching out to you in the future for more data and to help us work with some grant applications and just knowing what's going on in our communities. So we definitely appreciate this. And Jean, thank you for arranging to have David to share this information with us. And maybe we want to have him back someday too in the future.
He has presented at several diversity and inclusion summits, I believe, for the chamber, and you are an excellent resource, David. So thank you very much for spending your time with us.
Yeah, and like I said at the outset, if there's something you'd like to see replicated or adjusted or something we didn't talk about, like I said, this really only scratches the surface, for the type of information that's out there that can help at least be a guide or at least understand the situation so that you can plan programs and how to move forward in the way that seems most appropriate for the local area, and again, like you said, David City, Butler County is going to be a little bit different than Columbus, and so you think regionally, that's where some of the information can be especially useful to see those differences. You know, again, I don't know why Columbus, Platte County has a lower poverty rate than Madison and Platte County, and Norfolk and Madison County, but that's what the data show. So there are some differences there that structurally could impact how the programs need to be developed.
This
So
is
thank
John.
you for the opportunity.
This is John. Gene, is this David's presentation going to be posted online at the chamber website, perhaps, I hope?
We could probably do that. I know I was planning to send it out to the committee, and then we have an engaging diversity committee meeting before the board meeting in a couple of weeks. So I thought it would be a really good presentation to share with that group as well. So we could certainly, if David's open to that, make it available on our website. We're trying to do little incremental changes. We know we need to update our website, but we could add this underneath a tab there someplace.
And
Yeah,
that'd
we're
be
very happy to share.
Okay.
good. So that'd be good if, Gene, you could send it out to the whole committee.
Yep.
Thank you.
You bet.
He's good. He's a keeper.
Yes, he is. Well, our next meeting would be July 7th then, I believe, at 9 a.m. Does that work for everyone?
Yes, works for me here.
Yeah, I was just looking, that would be our next one. That looks good.
Okay, yes, from Greg. All right, well, we'll plan on it then. And thanks again, David. Thank you so much to everybody for attending and good information. And we've got some good opportunities ahead of us, I think.
Thank you very much.
Yep, just reach out whenever you have a question. We're happy to help. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a good day.
So decide if it's Zoom or in person.